Over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
For me, this episode talking about Takins is dedicated to Kubla, one of the loves of my life, Chabi.
What can they teach us?
The researchers hypothesize that these mineral salts might help detoxify or neutralize some of the effects of plants that they eat that are toxic.
Many species are in crisis and need your help. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
Welcome to All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
This is the Angie Show. This is the Angie Show. You've bugged me since we began this podcast almost 2 years ago that you wanted to do this species. So go. It's all you.
Yes, we have a saying in Michigan when we're playing this card game called euchre, which is pretty much just a Michigan game from what I can tell. But anyways, it's a partner game like spades or hearts. And when you have an amazing hand and you don't need your partner, at the beginning of the round, you say, I'm going alone. And so your partner has to sit out and you have to win the whole hand, beat your opponents, the team of opponents by yourself. And it's very rare. I've only had a few of them in my lifetime and boy, are they fun. So yes, Chris, today I can go alone and talk about Takin until my face turns blue, until in the wee hours of the night. However, for our audience, I will try to keep it not short, but moderately short and definitely sweet because the Takin are so near and dear to my heart. And quite frankly, I've been wanting to cover this species since we started, but it's also been a double-edged sword this week for me, Chris, because I really miss working with Takin and going through my old photos, which of course we'll post some fun ones on Instagram, and reviewing one of the articles I wrote with a colleague at the Lincoln Park Zoo about their behavior and some of their hormone statuses. I was just sad. I was missing them so much. I know. And Chris, a couple days ago, I even came home and I'd been driving in the car and the boys had fallen asleep. So that was kind of my alone thinking time. And when I walked in the door, John, my husband, says to me, "Are you okay?" And I was totally fine, but I had gotten all teary-eyed just thinking about my Takin. So this episode, like I said, is very near and dear to my heart. And for those of you that are not familiar with Takin, pull over the car, pause us, pull up an image of a Takin. It's Takin. We're going to describe it for you. It's a large goat antelope-like species. But they're just incredible. And it's like the biggest large herbivore that you've never heard of. And hopefully this will be very informative and it'll excite you about them the same way. As a zoology major, I had never heard about them until I started working at the Lincoln Park Zoo. And then I got to work with them and fell in love. And so for me, this episode talking about Takins is dedicated to Kubla, one of the loves of my life, Chabi, Jinsi, Mei Li, little baby I got to hold, and of course Bozen, or I also call him Bozo because he's just a brilliant creature. And also to all the keepers I got to work with throughout the years in the barn, working with Takin. They're big, strong animals, and they are very active, fun to train, super smart. So all the keepers that came before me and of course are still there working with them, a huge shout out to any Takin keepers because they're a really cool animal to work with, but they take a special keeper because they are very strong and they're not afraid to show you a little bit of muscle if they need to. So yeah.
Angie, honestly, I didn't know what these were until I think you showed up 10 years ago and said, "Oh, I did all this stuff." And you had a paper published. And I was really, I was really blown away that as, a zookeeper, you had a research article out there on these animals. So now I know what they are. And I've now seen them at the San Diego Zoo, the LA Zoo. It's one of those that I seek out to look at. And I can see why. They are one of the most unique herbivores, like you said, on the planet. They're amazing.
And they're really active all the time, really fun. And we'll talk about that when we get to their behavior, especially a lot of the juveniles. And Chris, before we get going, I've got to get a huge shout out to a group called the Peppermint Narwhal. For those of you that aren't familiar, they're an amazingly artistic environmental conservation group that does just these incredible graphics all about different species. And you can check out their artistic work at www.peppermintnarwhal.com, or what I highly recommend is that you follow them on Facebook, because a few times a week they have graphics, educational graphics about wildlife in general, especially a lot of endangered species like the takin, which we're talking about today, that really help educate you in just a simple graphic or meme, if you will, about the animals, what they're related to, what their plight is, where they live. And we went ahead this week to partner up with Peppermint Narwhal. Say that a few times fast. That's a mouthful.
It is.
To help them with the graphic and make sure that all the subspecies were right. And anyways, we'll add a link to our Facebook page and on Instagram. And hopefully you'll go check them out, like them on Facebook. You will not be disappointed. I've learned so much from this group. They do amazing media and artistic graphic. So a huge thanks to Peppermint Narwhal for reaching out to me and letting me work with them, because I love to help when I can.
Yeah, no, I've actually followed them for a few years, for I think like 2 to 3 years. I've been watching.
Yeah,
them.
you were in the know early. You're always the first.
But they were cool.
Early adapter.
Yeah, they were
it's so
amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, amazing species. This week they had goblin shark, which I showed my kids. Because they want us to do that episode. That's a hint, maybe not. And then it was Clouded Leopard Day the other day, so they had a beautiful graphic on that. So I'm excited to see their talking when it comes out with our episode. So we were working hand in hand with them, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
making friends all over the place.
I know we are. Oh, it's amazing. So talk about making friends. I got to give out some shout outs to the proper guesses on Fennec Fox last week. So on Instagram, Sid Kid Hippie, Carmary, and I know Autumn, ZKP are Autumn. So now they all guessed that on Instagram, and then G's on Facebook. It was too easy. I'm doing too easy these little things. So Jonathan up in BC. Hey, Jonathan. Susie, Jill, Melanie, Joy, Bailey, Blake, Amy, and Damien all guessed Fennec Fox. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. That was a fun one. They are so beautiful.
Oh, yes. I can't wait to cover another fox species, too. They're super fun.
Now, stay tuned, Angie. So I did, doing some of my digging, because I know you know most of the other stuff, so I had to find something obscure. So I found something about Jason and the Golden Fleece, which is a Greek. You know me and my love for Greek and Greece. I
am excited to hear about this mythology. I am not necessarily a myth buff like yourself.
Yeah,
so.
No, it's interesting how some of our myths and stuff are based in truth. So is there any link? What is this with Jason the Golden Fleece and this thing with the talking? So we'll stay tuned at the end for that one. That was kind of a fun thing I looked up and learned about. And, but I think really what the struggle of this podcast is going to be is to describe just how unique this animal is.
Right. How do you describe one of the loves of your life in words? Yeah. You really can't. You really just have to have feelings for them. And as I sit here now talking to you, there's a picture of Kubla hanging on my wall because I just love him so much. And we'll put a couple pictures of him up on Facebook and Instagram.
Absolutely.
But I think what is really prominent about them is they have all the bells and whistles. They have hooves and they have horns, right? So, of course, we love them to begin with. But what's also really striking about them is their nose, or their muzzle, if you will. It's big and black. In fact, some biologists, when they first came across Takin, they described them as an unusual cross between a moose or a bison or a wildebeest. And they've been known as a goat antelope, a new goat, or even a bee-stung moose due to its supersized snoz or nose.
Right.
In fact, a deer keeper friend of mine once joked that out of all the animals in the zoo, including giraffes and rhinos and elephants, that the takin had the biggest nose, even bigger than a dairy cow, as far as rotundness. Of course, the elephant has a trunk or whatever, so
Right.
it doesn't beat it in length. But just a huge, big black schnoz that, in my opinion, I just wanted to smooch. Now, of course, I didn't do that because that would be inappropriate behavior. Or if I did, we can't tell anybody, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and I grew up loving goats, and of course, who doesn't right now? There's goat yoga. And so a takin is kind of just like a giant goat, anywhere from 400 to 600 to 700 pounds, depending on if it's a female or a male. And they have this long, shaggy hair, and they're stocky front end, large bodied ungulate that has crescent shaped horns that kind of curve. And both male and females have horns as well, and they know how to use them. They're not shy, trust me. And they're kind of taller in the front end and slope down a little bit in the back end. And some of that conformation might have to do with them climbing in such steep mountains, which we'll get to when we talk about the range that they live in. And then their coat color is also gorgeous. You mentioned the golden fleece because they have a variety of coat colors, from yellowish to golden brown to reddish brown and to dark brown. And then a lot of them too have a dorsal stripe, which is basically a stripe that runs down vertebral column in the back that's black. And so they're golden up front a lot and then darker in the back. So they're party up front, business in the back, if you will. And just cute ears that kind of stick out to the sides, ovalish ears that stick out to the sides of the horns. And I'm probably not doing them justice. So you'll just have to check out Peppermint Narwhal's graphic, or of course our show notes, to really get an idea of what we're talking about. See what I did there?
I know. Yeah, I know. And talking about takins. So one of the things, I think you told me this a long time ago, and even San Diego Zoos had this on their site, that they look like an animal or a character from a Dr. Seuss book. Like, you told me that long ago. They're just so
it's
unique.
just the way their head is shaped, and then they have a big kind of long head, but then this nose, like I said, the nose isn't like bigger than the face, but it's overly proportioned, probably, to maybe some other animals, or I don't know. I'm not doing it justice, but it kind of has these littleish horns. Its horns are not super massive.
Oh, it's kind of cute. Yeah, it's a really cute.
Like some of the other animals we've talked about recently. But yeah, and of course it has the cloven hoofs. It's an ungulate, and so it's got two toes. And like a goat. So that's what kind of reminds me of a goat.
Yeah. And then some of the data, I mean, the height, they at the shoulder, they can be 3.5 to 4.5 feet, or 1 to 1.4 meters. Length, 5 to 7.5 feet, or 1.5 to 2.2 meters. And like you said, females up to 600 pounds or 280 kilograms, and the males up to 770 pounds or 350 kilograms. So they're not small. These are not small animals.
Oh, no. Definitely not small animals. And also, from a zoo perspective, when they're under human care, they are big, they are climbers, and they are strong. Like when goats headbutt each other or climb up on stuff, it's pretty cute, right? If you're doing yoga with them, or if you're in a goat petting pen. But a takin, no, it's not. I mean, it's a brilliant to watch because they're very agile for their size, and they can definitely climb pretty well, but they're also very strong and very powerful. So a lot of zoos can't house them unless they have special reinforced habitats or enclosures, because, I mean, they are very strong.
Very well. And you make a good point, because they range in Asia. So we're looking at China, Tibet, Bhutan, and India are the 4 major countries. And they're usually at altitude, so between 1,000 to 4,500 meters, which translates to 3,300 or up to almost 15,000 feet. So they, like to live up in altitude, and really the Himalayas is one of the areas they're kind of known for. So to be able to add to this podcast, because I know Angie wants to talk about all the fun stuff, but I thought it'd be kind of cool because I started this last week with the fennec fox and it made me kind of think about the biome. So I wanted to kind of talk about the Himalaya mountains real quick, because those of us that don't live near the Himalayas or have not been near that part of the world, though I do know we have listeners in India now and that part of Asia, which welcome to the podcast. Yeah, thank you.
Request
Please,
some more species.
Yeah, especially from your area of the world. But we do have listeners in that part of the world, which is amazing. But for those of us that don't live there, there's a varied, different types of habitat in that part of the world. Now, what we know about the Himalayas, tallest mountain range in the world. Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world, stands at 29,029 feet or 8,848 meters. Huge. This is actually the youngest mountain range on the planet.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. And it's a result from the Australia, they call it the Indo-Australia plate, pushing up into the Eurasian plate.
Yeah, I guess if I thought about it, I would have thought the Andes, like the New World.
Yeah.
But
New World. No. This is the geological time frame. So.
Okay, cool. This is why I love this podcast. Yeah. It's just filled with fun facts.
So Australia, we had to get an Australia reference in there. Australia-India plate is actually making the Himalayas as it runs into the Eurasian plate. Cool. But yeah, the Himalayas, we've covered, snow leopards to an extent. We probably need their own individual episode. But, you do have tigers and Asian elephants because the climates are ranging in the Himalayas from tropical at the base of the mountains to snow and ice at the top of Mount Everest that doesn't harbor any animals. So, you have these grassland, shrublands in between 9,000 to 16,000 feet. These are all areas where you do have snow leopards, the Himalayan tahr, musk deer, pikas. I read pikas like to be in this range. Then you have a little bit lower, if you go under 8,000 to 13,000 feet, a coniferous forest. So red pandas, which would be a cool one we should do one day.
Oh,
and
yes.
And Takins, obviously. Then you have a broadleaf mixed forest of 6,000 to 9,000 feet. So again, we're talking lives. And then you have the tropical, subtropical broadleaf forests. Takins don't live there, but tigers and Asian elephants do. So very, very unique biome, the Himalayan mountains. It's not just the ice that you think of or the snow, that you get down to the tropics.
Right.
All the way in between. So
yeah, or if you're talking, you migrate depending on the season. You go up and down as you need to, where the grasses are.
Yeah,
and the browse.
So so interesting. And as we travel around the world, I'll keep doing this and kind of updating on different biomes because I thought it was kind of a cool, unique thing that I should probably start to add.
Absolutely. Well, and it's fun to think about the ecology of, like you said, who lives where and who lives in what range. And so, yeah. And of course, the panda is somewhat in the Takin range as well, too, I believe.
Yeah. Yep.
So some of the bamboo forests and things.
Yeah.
And speaking of the range, like you mentioned, they're found in Bhutan, China, Northwest India, and Northern Myanmar or Burma. And in that range, there's actually 4 subspecies of takin, which are all vulnerable by the IUCN. And we'll get some of the numbers out a little bit later in the podcast.
And of the 4, so when you're talking about the ranges too, obviously the 4 subspecies. So the Bhutan takin, which you were talking about. So that's obviously Bhutan.
And now I'm going to highlight the Bhutan takin at the end of the podcast. So I have a new place where if I run away, I guess it's not. I guess it won't be a secret if it's on air. But I have a new place besides the Rhino Orphanage that people can find me. So we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. Okay. So that's the Bhutan takin number 1.
Right. Then next to it in, I guess, Nepal and China, Tibet is the Mishmi takin.
And yes, the Mishmi takin, those are housed under human care, I think, at San Diego Zoo. I think they're the one of the only zoos in North America that has them. There's only one or two zoos. And the Bhutan, I should have mentioned, both the Bhutan and the Mishmi have like more of the dark brown, reddish, and black coat to them. Still beautiful markings along their face and black high points and stuff, but they're what I consider to be a little bit darker in color and probably not where the myth of the golden fleece came from. So that's
Not
2.
yet.
Mishmi's number 2.
What are you getting ahead of yourself there? The golden fleece. Yeah, we're getting there though. We're getting there. You're right. So the 2. Okay, so let's keep going east and north a little bit into China. So then you have the Sichuan Takin, right? That's the one you worked with?
Sichuan.
Yeah,
Sichuan.
yeah.
Yes, this is the one that I worked with, the Sichuan Takin. They have more of the yellow, blonde hair or fur over their face, and then it runs down their neck and the crest of their neck into their chest and then into the front legs. And so I would say, I guess, the front half of their body is this beautiful. I mean, if talk about what do they call it, a store-bought blonde, right? For the girls that bleach blonde and dye their hair blonde. Well, this is all natural, folks. Yeah, this is all natural. Just beautiful, blonde and ish yellowish in the front half, and then the back half has some high points, but it's a little bit more darker brown and black in color.
Okay. Now we can talk about the beauty of the 4, I think. And that's the golden Takin, and that's just in a tucked away in a corner in China.
Yes. The golden Takin, I've never seen one in person, but from the photos, they're just stunning. They're all blonde for the most part, just gorgeous coat, long, shaggy fur, if you will. And of course, all of the Takin have kind of that goat long-haired chin some of it that hangs down from their chin. But yeah, the golden Takin's beautiful. And once again, you'll have to check out our show notes, or I think the peppermint narwhal graphic does a nice job of showing you some of the different coat colors and of course, unique aspects to each of the 4 subspecies.
Right. And the ranges are interesting because looking at this range map, and I'll post it on the show notes, I always do, the Bhutan is like really probably the smallest of the range. The Mishmi has the broadest range. The Sichuan, or the Sichuan, your favorites.
Sichuan.
Those things have a pretty moderate size range.
I mean, I think I'm saying it right. I don't know. But
you probably are. You worked with them. I didn't.
That's how we said it. That's how we said it in the Midwest. That doesn't necessarily mean it's right.
And then the golden one, their range is pretty small. Yeah, I guess the Bhutan has the smallest. But anyways, we'll get to their numbers towards the end of the podcast too. It's always interesting to look at that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Now, Angie, set your personal feelings aside for a second.
Stop it. That's the fun part of this podcast.
But why care? Besides the fact that you love them, this extremely unique mammal, why care about the Takin?
I think that's actually enough.
Okay. Yeah, it is.
Even if you Google, I'll tell you a little bit more, but even if you Google it, some really cool blog posts come up by different science writers or National Geographic people, explorers, that basically say this is like the largest mammal you've never heard about that you need to know about. You should care about it. It's just so unique and gorgeous to look at, and amazing climber, very well adapted to different habitats, as you kind of mentioned, within the Himalayas of the lower altitudes and, of course, of the higher altitudes. So that's probably number 1. And then number 2 is I've worked with them. Their behavior and their personalities are more on the goat side than probably the antelope side. And when we get to evolution, you'll talk about they're in the bovid family. So you'll help us segment out what are they more related to, an antelope or a goat or a sheep, or what are they? But their personality is big. They're big, stocky, powerful animals, and they have big personalities. And that for me that's one of the main reasons I fell in love with them, and really smart, fun to train. They're just amazing creatures. So we have to help conserve them for that alone. So someday I can retire and just work with Takin all day long. And but from an environmental or ecosystem perspective, they're a large herbivore. And we'll talk about it in nutrition, but they eat plant material, so anywhere from grasses, and they browse a lot too on several different plants. So they fill that niche. as far as mowing down certain grasses, some seed dispersal, and eating a lot of food each day, right? As a member in the cow or bovid family, they eat a lot each day. And so if you take away a major herbivore like that, I can only hypothesize that it would have a big repercussion on a lot of the plant and or grass species that are in their habitat in the Himalayas. And with that being said, even though they are big, powerful animals, so adults are safe for most predators, they do play a role in sometimes being a snack for, like you mentioned, a snow leopard, depending on where they're found, other large carnivores. So they have that role as well too, right?
Yeah.
And then from an economic importance, when it's not about the money, it's about the money, right? Like my dad used to always say, there's not a whole lot of data, except for that people are starting to take notice and want to learn more about this creature. They are being studied more now to try to learn about their natural behaviors and how they migrate and where they breed and what the numbers are. There's still some inefficient data as far as that goes. And in fact, there's even starting to be a little ecotourism as far as wanting to go see these guys in the wild. I know I would be on that train if I had free time and money. Sign me up for that, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, it would be really cool if the Takin was added to, you know how Africa has like the big five or whatever. In the Bhutan, southern China, northern India area, where Takins can be found, it'd be cool if they were part of like I want to see a Takin, a red panda, a pika, you had mentioned, or a panda. Like if there could be maybe a safari, for lack of better words, that went around to perhaps reserves or preserves to see those guys. So I think anybody that studies them a little bit or learns a little bit about them will fall in love. And then, of course, that could drive some economics and money generated for the community around there.
Right. Which is always a positive of ecotourism. You know, one of the reasons we're really pushing it, or we want to push it, is it helps put money in the pockets of locals. You know, employs a lot of people.
Responsible. Don't try to take a selfie with the Takin.
No.
Trust me.
I just read someone else got gored by a bison in
exactly.
Yellowstone.
No, these guys are related to bison. They and we'll talk about in behavior. But yeah, if they have any animal that has horns, is not afraid to use them.
No, that's why they have them.
And at the zoo, it should be noted too, any of the pictures you see of me and Takin or whatever, it was always through protective contact. Always. I mean, they were one of the most dangerous animals in the barn. Because not necessarily on purpose, but just their overall size. And once again, if they get spooked, they're not going to run away from you. They're going to come towards you, right?
Yeah, and you don't want to be in there. Definitely don't want to be in there. Now, you keep mentioning some of their natural history. So let me set the record straight, because it's really interesting. You know, it was kind of interesting to go through this and see where they fall in the Bovidae family. Now, their scientific name is, I'm probably going to butcher it, Budorcus taxicolor.
Budorcus taxicolor.
There you go. I knew you'd correct me.
Yeah, and so my kubla is Budorcus taxicolor tibetana.
There you go. And then the Bhutan is Waitai. So, and I guess the Budorcus taxicolor Waitai. Mishmi is Budorcus taxicolor. And then the golden is Budorcus taxicolor Bedfordi. So those are the scientific names of all the four subspecies.
There will be a quiz after the show, Chris. Just kidding.
I had to get that right for you. Now,
thank you.
This was interesting. Natural history for, 100 years since they've known the species, they've always linked them to muskox because they look very similar, right?
They do. Not as shaggy, but
no.
Definitely
look similar. Look similar. They always thought, okay, these two things are related.
Which we need to cover those guys too. Oh,
we
man.
will. We will. Definitely we will. But we know now with DNA evidence that is not true. They actually are not that closely related. But because of convergent evolution, They look very similar.
Buzzword.
Yep.
Yes.
Angie covered that like, I don't know, 60 pods ago, where species have evolved similar form or function of the body, but they're actually not that closely related. So they look very similar, but they're not. Now, obviously, the Bovidae, you have your cattle, your antelope, bison, sheep, and goats. Those are your big ones. Where do takin fall in? Well, I'll tell you what, they're not related to antelope at all. I mean,
Or
up
moose.
the tree, or moose. I mean, up the tree they are, obviously.
Or news, not related wildebeest.
No. But they are related. They're in the subfamily Caprinae, which is sheep and goats.
Yes.
So that is where they fall. So ibex, mountain goats, etc. Those are the more related species. Now, what's interesting, this was fun. Within Caprinae, there's actually tribes. And this tribe is, I love this name, it's so funny, Ovi bovini. So Ovi bovini includes the takin and muskox. But now we know the muskox and takin aren't really that closely related, but they still fall into the same tribe.
Okay.
Now, we've covered bovid evolution many times. Don't need to go over it. It's been over 15 million years. Now, Bodorcus genus, the first fossils we can find is somewhere about 4 to 2 million years ago in China. Mm-hmm. So their ancient relatives were from China. And then DNA sequencing is showing that they're actually more closely related to sheep than they are to goats.
I've known some cool sheep. That makes sense. I've definitely known some fun sheep.
But they say sheep and takin don't necessarily share a very common ancestor. They're just more closely related
Than goats, sure.
So the takin are just completely on their own, completely rare.
See, now you get it. They
Yeah.
are. They're just so different. And it is just really incredible because I worked with a lot of different keepers during my tenure. And so a lot of different people that I know got to work with takin. And a lot of them were, let's just say, more marine mammal keepers or primate keepers or carnivore keepers like my husband. And of course, obviously, some hoof stock and farm keepers as well. And typically, obviously, us hoof stock and farm keepers, no doubt, of course, we fell in love instantly.
Yeah.
But the keepers that were more primate or great ape keepers, as well as a carnivore keeper, that everybody loved. Everybody loved Kubla. Everybody loved the takin. In fact, the CEO of the zoo, one of his favorites were the takin, just because they're so charismatic and and so they are hard to describe, and hopefully this podcast, for those of you that aren't familiar with them, will excite you to learn more about them. If not from our podcast, from other sources, because they're cool.
Yeah, they're just so unique. They're so unique. Now, here's something interesting too about the takin, is their genetic variability is very low, just like the cheetah we covered. Well, we did. We released it. It was a Patreon only, but we did cover the cheetah. And we talked about this. At the end of the last ice age, they almost got wiped out. So did cheetah. North America cheetah went extinct. Like, cheetahs almost went extinct. That is where they lost a lot of their genetic diversity. Their population was so low. So
yes, but they survived, and they're still surviving. Yep, and that would be another reason why I care about them, is, like you said, they survived that ice age. Man, they fought hard. Let's keep fighting for them, right?
Now, Angie, one of the things I love doing is finding the largest of something or the smallest of something. I couldn't find anything cool. So I just couldn't. I looked.
You don't need to. Just, they're cool enough on their own, Chris.
I know. So I came up with the origin of the Caprinae family of sheep. Where do you think sheep in the world evolved from? Of all the places on Earth.
North America.
No, I know you would think, because everything evolved in North America.
Everything's North America. Okay, let me take a second guess, because that was just my quick
instant guess. Yeah.
I guess I would go with Asia or the Middle East.
Yeah, Tibetan Plateau. That's where they think. Yeah, there you go.
Cool.
So it's called the out of Tibet hypothesis that ancestral sheep. Now, if we go back more and more millions of years ago, because a lot of things did come out of North America, sure. But sheep today, like the takin, the modern species we see, or really the wild type that we're talking about, they believe evolved out of Tibet or that part of China and then dispersed around the world, where they went into Europe and then also North America, where they came in.
We need to do bighorns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyways, I thought that was a cool factoid. I had to find something to fill that spot.
I love it. No, you did fantastic. You always, I always learn, which is fun.
Yeah. Now, these things, Takin can live 10 years in the wild or up to 12 years under human care. I didn't know if you found anything longer.
Of course, it's probably on a subspecies basis or data. I think it depends on the subspecies and probably whether they're in the wild or under human care. But I had in the wild, it might be up to 15 to 18 years.
Okay.
Of course, it depends on their health and all that. And then under human care, I would say, 12 to 15, maybe up to 20, close to your typical bovine.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Like 10 sounded a little low for me, but because it's a large ungulate and they tend to live a little bit longer than, say, a carnivore. Carnivore, 12
not
years.
as long as horses.
No, not what. Rosie's still going.
Or rhinos, rhinos and elephants. So way longer.
Yeah. If we go back to Przewalski horse, that was one of our early episodes, and you were talking about how long is this horse going to live for?
No,
How old's
Rosie? She's still going strong. 34.
Yeah, she's doing good.
She gets healthier every day. She loves her Florida retirement. So bless her heart.
Yes. Now, obviously, we said these animals are adapted to alpine life. One of the things I found interesting, and since we just covered Saiga a few pods ago, is that large nose you were talking about. Its purpose. Its purpose is that they're in this high altitude where it's cold. And like the Saiga, that large nose, when they inhale, warms up the air. So when it hits the lungs, it doesn't hurt, or cools down body core temperature either.
Yeah, isn't that physiology, form and function, right? And Chris, preparing for this podcast too, I also read that with these high altitudes, they will make use of some of the hot springs.
Oh, no kidding.
Similar to
those,
snow monkeys.
Yeah, which we'll have to cover too. Those things are amazing.
And it's just interesting because we never, of course, in Chicago it gets very cold and they love the snow and they're so fun to watch in the snow with their enrichment. And of course, they're just amazingly interactive and fun animals to watch. And in the summertime, we provide them a swimming pool or wading pool and they love that. But we never did the hot springs with them. So I don't know if they would make use of it or not in under human care. But yeah, I thought that was a really fun factoid. And I see that could be the ecotourism event, right? Like go there, see the Takin in the hot springs with the with the snow monkeys, and then you are in a hot tub with a fence in between y'all and just drinking your coffee.
I know. Oh, that'd be awesome. So here's something that you probably ran across. Their skin secretes this oily, bitter tasting, I don't know who would taste it, substance.
That a true scientist, a hardcore scientist out in the field, like, what is this crap on their skin? And then they're like, oh man, that does not taste good. Somebody
speaking from experience, right? I'm looking at her.
Oh yeah, John knows. I always fall for every time I'm like, let me smell that bologna, and then I always, or cheese or shoes, and I go in and I own it. And every time after I do that, I'm like, why did you let me go so close to the source? So, and they lack skin glands, but they do secrete this oily substance, and researchers think it's perhaps to protect their coat from rain, maybe during when they're in the rainy season or storm in the wintertime. But another hypothesis too is it can be used to rub on trees during rutting or their breeding season as perhaps a sign of this is my territory or I'm here. And so, they're not really sure. And our Takin weren't too greasy in Chicago.
Good. That's good.
So I don't really ever remember it being something where if I was training with them and doing some tactile reinforcement of either grooming them, or I don't remember ever coming off and having grease on my hands. The same way, for instance, when I used to have a husky and I would pet him, I would always have like a little film on my coat. And then I don't think his oil secretions were bitter. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe if it's more of a thing depending on their hormonal levels or male versus female, but it obviously is an important part of their physiology, especially in the wild. And yeah, so no, it's a fun fact, but definitely not greasy. Like the first time I touched a hippo, I was like, holy cramoly.
Yeah.
Totally not what you expect. It is very, they have a really slimy,
greasy,
oily secretions, which just helps them in the water. It's very important. All this stuff has, of course, a physiological importance. But the Takins that I hung out with were fluffy. So
okapi, another animal that secretes.
Right.
Yeah. And that stuff's nasty. That gets on your hands. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but no, I kind of want to go pet Jinsey or Mei Lee and
taste it.
lick my hand. But that would be bad for biohazard purposes. So who's listening, I'm not going to do that. So.
Yeah, no, don't let Angie near your Takins.
No, hey, no.
I'm kidding. Angie loves your Takins. Bring her by.
Yes, I usually get to go by and visit once a year if I'm lucky. So, and then Angie, I cry every time I leave. It's so hard to say goodbye.
So, I think the rest of their physiology, they're just built tough. They're built these shaggy coats. Their hearing, their eyesight,
solid like a rock, like the rock they climb on. Males, females, they're tough. They are tough.
Yeah. So physiology, your basic bovid, type physiology, but some adaptations for that Himalayan or that high altitude life.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Now, just really quickly, Angie, and you can maybe speak more to this, I don't know, but as far as what they eat, a variety of plants in that environment. I think I read somewhere one scientist said over 60 plants, close to 70 plant species that they like to graze on or really browse on, right?
Sure. Yeah, they do. They'll do both. They're, like you said, they're very adaptable depending on what's around, I suppose.
Right. Time of year, things like that. Did read a little bit. They do go and to get their minerals, they'll go and do salt licks or something where they can find it.
Yeah, Chris, it's a huge part of their literature from any of the handful of studies that have been done of them in the wild, of either the Mishmi or the Goldens, I believe. They actually have a really high intake of minerals or salt, and they'll travel great distances to reach these salt deposits. And when they get there, they'll hang out for several days. So researchers aren't really sure why it's such a high demand compared to maybe some other bovid species that have been studied. But researchers hypothesize that these mineral salts might help detoxify or neutralize some of the effects of plants that they eat that are toxic or may have toxins in them. Okay. So they're not sure. But it is a pretty unique, cool behavior. And Chris, I also read this kind of crazy, for those listeners that are sensitive, you might want to not, and you love pandas, you might not want to listen to this, but there was footage from camera traps or trail footage of pandas, which live in some of the Takin habitat, mowing down on a Takin carcass.
Oh, okay.
Which is bizarro, right? Because pandas are also herbivores, but maybe they might have some omnivore traits if they come across something. So,
well, we know from covering pandas that pandas do have the carnivore stomach.
Right. They should be carnivores according to their digestive physiology, which check out that podcast for us to really dork out about nutrition. We won't do that this time. So I was
that's
like,
bizarre.
Oh,
that's
man,
bizarre. Wow.
I don't like that visual. Like
I know,
these pandas
I know.
just chillaxing, eating their bamboo, and and I don't know how prevalent. It was just documented one time or what, but very interesting.
Yeah.
And in regards to some of their nutritional behavior, Takins are really agile, and so they often will stand up on their hind legs, and so now they're really tall, like very, very big and tall. I might be able to post some pictures of them during some of my training sessions where I'm cueing them for an up behavior, of course, and protective contact.
Yeah.
And I mean, their front feet are well over my head, But this is a natural behavior that we would solicit for hoof trims and things like that, because what they'll do is they'll push over saplings and trees and to get some of the green foliage. And also talking about how adaptive they are to their environment, they can reach a lot of the taller browse. I mean, they're no giraffe, but they can reach a lot of the taller browse than some of the other animals. So it just really helps diversify.
Yeah. And the gearnook came to my mind. One of those long neck species. Chris,
that's exactly what they do. Although they're not quite as agile as a gearnook that can almost just mid-air stand on 2 feet. Almost looks like they could just walk right into your house. But they usually will, like I said, stand on something to help them, and it might even be a tree to brace themselves to grab the leaves or to push it over. And so just really, really cool behaviors. And then they have these, once again, to talk more about their bee stung muzzle or their lips. They have really broad, flexible lips that can be selective for certain feedings. And so, yes, definitely easily the best mouth or lips ever, hands down. Better than I would even go as far to say, this is going to be, I don't know if I can even say this.
Controversial. Here we go.
But probably even better than a black rhino. There's the black rhino is a browser. Yeah. It's amazing when you get to hand feed them because they just have that prehensile lip, and it's But I don't know. For me, I think a Takin wins. So that's a different debate.
Well, you've been up close personal, so you've seen it.
Yeah, I fed them both. I guess not everybody can say that, right? So, but
I'm
also very biased.
You did not kiss them. Yeah, and you did not say you did not kiss them on the nose. So we don't know.
I know. Oh,
but you do want to. You want to just scratch their head.
I miss
so
them.
So I know this is really, what you studied with them, some of their behavior. So I know this is a rare treat for us and me to hear from somebody, one of the rare studies, really, think about it, on this species. You and Rachel did one of the few studies on Takin, especially under human care.
Yes.
So what are some of the stuff, I guess, not only that you learned, but what are some of the behaviors that they do that just astound you?
Well, at the zoo, we were wondering about some of their breeding behaviors. And so instead of just saying, oh, we think they're doing this or they're not doing that, we actually used science and did a behavioral ethogram and a behavioral study to try to figure out how they're spending their days. As far as an activity budget, a lot of what you sometimes mention is boring, a lot of eating and sleeping.
Well, this is where it all began. This is where it all began for me and you. This is where it all began.
Yeah. And
years ago. Yeah.
Yes. Hours and hours of my life and a whole bunch of volunteers observed our family of Takins to see what they were doing. And first it was a male and a female. And then we brought in another female. And then one female came in pregnant. And then our other female ended up pregnant. And then they had 2 offspring, baby Takin, that we got to watch grow up and learn about baby Takin behavior, which is just, there's nothing cuter. And I have some photos that I'll put up as far as they're like little goats. They grow really fast, but they're like little goats and they climb on everything, including their moms. And they're just fun. They headbutt, super funny, anything. They'll headbutt anything. And so, we just observed them under human care in their big exhibit, wanted to see how they utilize the exhibit. Were they in the pool a lot? Were they playing in the snow? What were they doing? And the reason we wanted to do this is because, when we looked up or called other zoos, hey, what do Takins do? Everybody was like, I don't know. And then my colleague, from an endocrinologist point of view, Rachel, when she called up other zoos and said, hey, what do their hormones look like if they're pregnant? Because she studies feces to learn about hormone profiles in animals to tell if they're stressed out or to tell if they're pregnant or if they've hit puberty, all these really cool questions she can answer with just their poop. And everybody said, we don't know. So her team worked on the hormone profiling. I collected a lot of poop along with my colleagues. And then I worked on the behavioral aspect of the family and their interactions and dynamics. And then we came together and wrote a paper to help other zoos that are wondering what their daily activity budget looks like. So, we can post it on the show notes, but really, it's probably not too exciting for people. But
I was excited for you.
It is exciting. What I'm
me
trying to say.
let me jump in, since I wasn't on the paper. This was before I met you, and I've been thinking a lot about this today too. And I was thinking about, the research being produced that you did, okay, per se, or other zoos are doing, and how that translates to our knowledge. And if we go back, just the Panda Keeper talk with the San Diego Zoo, which was amazing, and they were talking about ZIMS and sharing information across agencies on these animals.
You don't want to reinvent the wheel, and especially a lot of these animals are novel or endangered or vulnerable. And so asking scientific questions to help learn more about their reproductive biology, to learn more about their behavioral biology and overall physiology to enhance their welfare. That is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and it's, it's easy to point at zoos and say, oh, that animal is never going to be released in the wild. That may be true. But where I'm going with this is the data being produced does affect animals in whatever wild remains. And the reason I'm saying that is, I was thinking about it today, Dr. Barney Long, bringing all these Sumatran, I know, we got to get him back on, bringing all these Sumatran rhinos under human care, because they're almost extinct. There's 50 left in the world. They're doing an emergency plan. Yeah, emergency plan to bring them all under human care, to take care of them and protect what's left in the world of this population. That data that we've produced, not me per se, but your colleagues or other people in zoos throughout the world, is directly affecting Sumatran rhinos. I guarantee it. The diets, how to manage them, the work that our friend Allison did in rhino relocation, the things she did, the data that she used and the information she used in rhino relocation in Africa, saving black rhinos, was produced in zoos.
Sure.
So,
absolutely.
I'm sorry to jump in there, but
I appreciate it. It's great. You explain it so well. I'm kind of in it, or I was in it so heavily that
can't see it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to see the forest through the trees, and so in the wild, there's just not a lot known about their activity budgets. It literally says they may be active day and night, but this can change with the season, and so there's not a lot of concrete data of how these animals typically are spending all their time, and once again, we know as a bovid that they're gonna ruminate and migrate and sleep and be inactive and all this and that, but how and where they do it. And I think with the Takin, it was incredibly interesting to ask some questions about how social they are, because in the wild, they're very social, very gregarious creature. However, their core unit is females with their young, and of course, generations of offspring from these females. And there might be a male in there, but older males are usually solitary unless it's breeding or rutting season. Or if they're younger males, of course. So when we had them under human care, we wanted to ask the question of, well, do we need to keep our males and females separated unless it's breeding season? And so asking those kinds of questions were really interesting, because we found out from our study that they were fine living side by side. And it could have been, of course, the male, perhaps, and this group of females. And sometimes, of course, that's where animal care staff always has to make judgments based on the individual animals. But for us, we found that they did fine, and they actually expressed social affiliative, which that's a fancy word for friendly behaviors, anywhere from 5 to 10% of the time. And that would even sometimes be the male with the offspring or the younger Takins, the juvenile Takins. And so it was really important data when you're trying to figure out how to house these when you don't have as much space, or when you only have a certain amount of yards and exhibits that they can be in. And then, of course, we also learned from our study that it makes sense. They spend about 30% of the time feeding and drinking, and they are very active during the day. They're not necessarily nocturnal animals. And they also rest a lot, which is probably them ruminating. We actually found that they spend a decent percent of their time off exhibit, they had an area behind the scenes where they could, if they didn't want to be out in their yard, if they wanted to go hang out behind the scenes, they did that a lot. And so we learned that it was very important for their welfare to offer them that option. And so, because it's all about the Takin and what makes a happy Takin. And of course, Rachel was monitoring hormones to figure out those sorts of questions. And so really important too is when we learn more about them under human care and then we learn more about them in the wild, we can cross-reference each other and learn from each other, because I would want to know more of what they're eating in the wild so we could mimic, have a more natural diet, keep them more healthy under human care. And there are groups that have been doing some radio collaring of Sichuan Takins, I believe. And there has been some radio collaring of some of the golden Takins that's helping us provide more data about understanding some of their rutting behavior and overall breeding behavior, which I'll get to. But it definitely is a collaborative effort to try to learn about their basic biology in order to enhance their welfare when they're living under human care, but also to help them live in the wild, right? To learn more about what areas we need to protect, where do they migrate, things like that. And in regards to their migration, it has been documented that they will go to the highest altitudes in the summer, which that makes sense, right? Get out of the heat. And during the spring, they'll be at the lowest altitude, probably getting the green grasses. And then in the winter, they spend a little bit time in the intermediate area. But they definitely move between low valleys and high forests. And they'll follow these paths that are usually well worn by other animals and also that may lead them to these different mineral licks.
Well, I just, again, and I know, like you said earlier, you were in the middle of it, so you don't see it. And I, outside of the research I've done, and again, this global perspective we have on the crisis we're in, the biodiversity crisis we find ourselves in. And all these agencies are coming together and fighting for the Takin, fighting for, different species throughout Africa, Asia, South America, North America, Australia, and the oceans. So the data being produced with animals under human care, I cannot understate this to people that aren't in the industry or aren't scientists, or just every day trying to understand because they care. Our listeners care. Especially an hour into an episode, they're still listening. The people still listening right now are conservation heroes. They care.
Sure.
They care. And so it's just, we need to educate the masses that zoos are doing so much critical work. And again, that's the message, you and I are trying to get out there as outsiders now. You haven't worked in zoos for years, and I've never worked for a zoo. So as a scientist, as an educator, as a podcaster now, we really cannot applaud the work being done behind the scenes that people don't know that you did that study. Just the people in the zoo industry that care about Takins.
Right. The zookeepers are behind the scenes putting a rubber glove on and collecting their poop every day, sometimes twice a day, to try to better understand what's going on with them physiologically, asking questions about their health, about their reproductive status, about their happiness, and really trying to learn from them. And and it's a collaborative effort. It's from the top up to the bottom. And it was and that's what basically made me want to go back to school, seeing what Rachel did, seeing what's out there, that there's so many more questions to be asked. And so, it was a phenomenal experience that shaped me to where I am today. But gosh darn, I miss those. So enough about my paper. Let me tell tell you why I miss them even more is that they're just awesome. They're awesome. And as far as the Takin's activity goes, when they locomote or when they walk, they have their head down low and they kind of sway side to side, and they look tough. Like they look like bad leap, like awesome. They look like cool dudes and gals. They move slow and deliberately, but they're also very nimble, right? Like they can stand up on their hind feet, and which makes sense with their habitat and where they live in the wild. But what's also endearing it's two things. Sometimes you'll catch them sitting down like a dog. And I have a picture and I'll share it on our web notes. It's just super cute. And who doesn't love a cute animal in a cute position? But they also sleep totally different than cows or any other bovine that I've seen. They sleep with their front legs extended, and then they rest their head on like one of their front legs, like on the knee or the carpal joint of their front legs,
right,
like a dog would.
Right.
And Kubla always laid in this position, and it was just so endearing. And so I don't know that that's just how they ruminate or what, but there's nothing better than a baby takin at a zoo. And so check out your local accredited zoo to see when that happens, because if there are any, you need to go watch them. Like I said, very busy. Our behavioral studies show that they spend a lot of time playing and being social affiliative behaviors, a lot of head butting, and just frolicking, jumping, playing with enrichment, just like a goat, as I had mentioned before. And so just they're always a house favorite. I know we just recently covered meerkats on one of our Patreon episodes. Also another zoo favorite, right? Because of their busybodiness. Right. I would say a younger takin is definitely a zoo favorite because they're so active. And of course the adults will be active too. If you give them the right enrichment that they can beat up, oh man, they will throw a barrel around or a ball. And yeah, they, like I said, they're not scared to use their horns. And as far as communication goes, the males, once again, they'll have kind of this posture when they walk towards a female, like they're Mr. Cool Pants, slow, steady, tough walk. And they hold their neck kind of rigid, and they'll even lower their head a little bit, almost like they're showing off their horns. And they may spar heads too sometimes, but usually, even if it's a male on male, that usually doesn't get too aggressive. One will back off pretty quick, understanding they're a hierarchical dominance type animal, right? So the younger, weaker ones understand what that means for the most part, typically. And as far as vocalizations go, they don't have a typical goat or cow or sound or sheep sound or anything like that, but they will snort, and they have like deep, almost like guttural vocalizations. And some even describe too that they have like a whistle through the nose. I don't know if I ever heard that one. But when they're in danger, they have this like coughing, deep sound too that comes from their throat. Hey, if we stand by, I'll play one really quick.
Yeah, that was like, you know what I thought? I thought, I don't know why, but I thought of bison, or I thought of Cape buffalo.
Yeah.
When I heard that,
definitely, and
that's pretty deep.
Not an animal you want to mess with. That's for sure. And in regard to the reproduction, we also looked at some of their reproductive behavior in our study. And once again, for our animals, we didn't really find a lot of courtship behavior, and we didn't find much breeding behavior. So we're not sure if we may have missed some things because we didn't take data on them in the dark. So research, you always learn from it. Theoretically, it would have been great if we would have had more money to have some like night cameras on them to see what they're doing in the nighttime. But they did breed. Our female did get pregnant. And so I don't know if some of their courtship behaviors are maybe more cow-like, so quick and just easygoing. Yeah, we definitely need more research on that. And as far as their estrus cycle, Rachel was looking into that, measuring the hormones and trying to figure out a little bit about that. And then, of course, measuring too how to tell if they're pregnant, because what people might not realize is in a lot of these bigger zoo animals, or zoo animals in general, it's not as obvious as in humans when a female is pregnant. And the other thing is, it may not even be obvious, or when it's obvious, it's like, oh my goodness, the baby's coming. So, of course, zoos wanting the best health and care for the animals, we like to prepare and know that an animal is pregnant and for how long they've been pregnant so that we can learn about their gestation period. And then, of course, we can prepare for when the offspring is going to come, whatever that means. Maybe we need to separate animals out. Maybe we need to prepare more bedding. Maybe we need, if they're expected to give birth in the wintertime, maybe we need to keep them inside. So a lot of what Rachel's work is trying to figure out a lot about their pregnancy by measuring progesterone, right? The pregnancy hormone. And so we got some really cool data about that. And I think she was one of the first ones to report on that. And so now colleagues, of course, across the country are utilizing that data. But we do know in the wild that males will gather with females during the rutting season, which is in late summer. And around July, August, something like that. And the gestation period is about 220 days or 7 to 8 months.
Yeah. So,
And our data from the zoo study did show that we think they are seasonal breeders. And we looked at all this data of births throughout North America. And it didn't follow a super obvious pattern, but there are definitely a couple of months that Takins were never born. And if it was completely random, such as a cow, right, that can breed any time of year, then it wouldn't be then we wouldn't have had this isolation. And so we do think they're seasonal breeders, which helps us in North America understand some of that.
Yeah, and I mean, say the sheep are seasonal, right? So we know sheep. Yeah, so we know sheep breed in the winter months, so they have a shorter gestation, so babies are born in the spring. So it makes sense, especially something that lives in the alpine, elevations, that they would want to have babies when there was a lot of grass. So yeah, I guarantee you, well, I wouldn't guarantee. I would bet heavily
if you were a betting man,
that there's some seasonal.
Yeah, but it was really cool when we had the numbers from all the births in North America since like the 1990s, which really weren't. It wasn't a ton, but it was enough to be statistically significant, which is important in science. And so, it was, things like that are really important. But usually it's just like cows. It's they give birth to one calf. Baby Takin weighs about 5 to 7 kilograms or 11 to 15 pounds. Stay tuned for the cutest picture ever of me.
That is tiny.
And Maylee.
That's tiny. That's tiny.
It is. Like I said, stay tuned for the photo. It's not the cutest of me, but the Takin is all you'll be looking at. So I'm like all greasy and zookeeper-y, which is, like I said, the favorite part of my life, right? It was awesome. But yeah, and you'll have to check out some of our pictures of Takin calves. They're gorgeous. They don't really have any horns when they're born, and their horns go slowly, both in males and females. They come out with their hair darker than the moms at birth. At least this is all in the Sichuan Takin. I guess I should have probably prefaced that ahead of time. But anyways, they also have a beautiful dorsal stripe running down their spine. And they're just wild and fun and full of personality and they're just awesome. And so they're in the wild. They're typically weaned around 2 months or so, but they'll stay by their mom for a lot longer, even until maybe the next breeding season when the next calf is born. Right. And it is important to note too, which is a little bit different than other goat or cow species, is that they don't become sexually mature until they're 4.5 if they're female, or 5.5 if they're male, and maybe even longer if they're a male, to be tough enough to pass on their genetics, right? So when we look at life cycle, that's really important to think, is that it's going to take these guys a while to rebound their numbers if they're not reaching their sexual maturity until they're 4.5 or 5 or so.
It's long. Yeah, it's a long time. And in that spirit, these are vulnerable. They're classified as vulnerable. Their populations are decreasing. They're under a lot of pressure. Just to give some numbers from IUCN, Golden Takin, 5,500 latest estimates. The Mishmi Takin at 3,500. The Sichuan Takin, no hard numbers, but they estimate a few thousand. And this one, the Bhutan Takin, 500 to 700 left. So overall, max 12,000. Again, small sports arena for an entire species of 4 subspecies.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that's data from 2008 with IUCN.
It's old. It is old. Yeah, it's old data. That's another thing. It's another thing with IUCN. They're just, the scientists in that organization doesn't have the money to update some of this
Correct.
stuff. They're doing what they can, and they're getting the data from various organizations around the world. But you and I know, anybody that does science in exotic wildlife or endangered species, there's no money.
Sure.
There's such tiny amounts of funding out there. It just reminds me of the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians that we had on, and talking about them and the little bit of money they can give, 4 or 5 studies, and they're desperate. Sure. Everybody's desperate for money to help these animals. So anyways, get off my soapbox. But yeah, it's not great. They're heading towards extinction, obviously, sure. Population decreasing. Mm-hmm. But I think China's taken notice, and they're trying to protect theirs. And then, you were talking about something. Yeah. That where you might disappear.
Mm-hmm, right. Yeah. So when you look for a Takin conservation group, there is not one. So hint, hint, John. That's one of my
that the hippos.
I know, right? So hippos and Takins, like his number one love, right. My tied for number one love. Yeah. But yeah, so there's not an individual per se group that I could find. Now there's a fair amount of researchers, especially in Asia, working with these guys and trying to understand more about their biology. And of course, several zoos. I think it was the Bronx Zoo, and I think the National Zoo, and maybe the Wild out of Ohio had been overseas to do some collaring, radio collaring, and working with some wild Takins, trying to figure out more about their numbers and their habitat. Mm-hmm. So there are people that care about them. It's just where should you give your money? I don't know. I guess go to your local accredited zoo, learn more about Takins, share this information. But I also want to give a big shout out to the country Bhutan, who, as Chris mentioned, is starting to really pay attention to just conservation in general, and especially with the Takin. The Bhutan Takin is their national symbol, or their national animal symbol, and they do amazing work as far as being carbon neutral. There's actually a TED Talk I need to send you, or maybe we can put on our show notes, about what they're doing in their little country, because this is a small country, not right. that many people. I think maybe 700,000 or something, that are doing some incredible work, and I would say are, in my opinion, leaders in how to be environmentalists and how to be conservationists. So definitely a huge shout out to, I've never really given a shout out to a country before. Lord knows I haven't. Right. Lord knows I have not given a shout out to the United States of America as of recently.
Not lately. No, not lately.
No. But definitely a huge shout out to Bhutan. So they're doing a lot there to not only benefit the Takin, but of course any species, from plants to soil to animals and habitat their land. And so I'm just really, really impressed. And a lot of it actually, Chris, has to do with what is called the 4 pillars of Bhutan's gross national happiness philosophy. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that is, but I want to be part of it. And so yes. You can find me at one of the places I might be. It's called Motahang Takin Preserve, located in the Motahang, I think I'm saying that right. It's Motithang district of Bhutan. It's a wildlife reserve for Takin, and it originally was a mini zoo, but then of course they converted it in this huge preserve and are working on saving the endangered or threatened, I think it's probably endangered at this point, Bhutan Takin, which I've never seen in person. So I'll put, and of course they don't
6 months.
Of course they don't have like a Facebook page or a website. They do have a Wikipedia page, and they do help house tourists and do some of that kind of those touristy type activities. That's another secret.
So 6 months of the year, you're going to be in Africa at the Rhino Orphanage. And then 6 months out of the year, you're going to be in Bhutan at the Takin Refuge.
Yes. Exactly.
For 12 months out of the year, when I run away, I'm going to be in Kenya at the elephant sanctuary. Where they're
That's a great
bottle
place,
feeding
too.
baby elephants. That's where I will be. So I will
don't
fly
know,
down
Chris.
to South Africa to see you.
I'll send you the link for the show notes, and you might change your. This is
Okay.
beautiful.
All
This
right.
is beautiful in Bhutan. So
I know. All right. Well, conservation tips this week, Angie. We're not running out of stuff to say, but I like to reinforce some of the other stuff we've mentioned in the past in case people didn't hear it at another podcast. And that's one of the things that I really, for me personally, need to pay attention more to, and that is shop smart. We've said vote with our dollar. I'm trying to think of Takin, and there is some climate change stuff out there that's affecting them. Specifically the Mishmi Takin. They actually, the Eastern Himalayas are very vulnerable to climate change. So you're seeing melting glaciers, less snowfall. The grasses are not doing as well. The flora is suffering, and that's affecting Mishmi directly. So we all need to act. We all need to be conservation heroes. So this week, shop smart. Some of the things that you need to look for, we've talked about in the past. Certified sustainable palm oil. That affects tiger, orangutan, all of those species in Indonesia. So you want to look for RSPO. Okay, that's certified palm oil. Something else you want to look for, Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, on wood and paper products. Angie and I talked about this in a past podcast, talking about, sustainable wood, sustainable forestry. So FSC products are sustainable. And I'm going to put this on the show notes. I actually have the graphic. I'm going to put it on the show notes so you can look at these labels. Yeah. The other ones are the Marine Stewardship Council. So you want to look for that in your seafood. And then food and beverages with the Rainforest Alliance certified seal. So these are things that we all can do every single day when we go shopping, or whenever we do shop. Look for these products because we need to vote with our dollar. We absolutely need to tell these companies we want sustainable food products, period, end of story. Or not just food products, but everyday use products.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about it in our next in our next conservation news. But there are companies that are starting to listen. Some really big companies.
Oh, yeah.
And it's because they're feeling the heat, man. So let's
keep it up.
Keep it up.
Let's keep it up.
For the Takin.
All right. So, yes, for the Takin. Now, for, my favorite Greek, this is for her, Julie. And, Mike, another one of my favorite Greeks that I could probably pick their brains a little bit about the Jason and the Golden Fleece myth, because they're very fluent in Greek culture. But basically what I read up on is this was a myth born from ancient Greece, and it's talking about Jason and the Argonauts. And Jason was tasked to go find this mythical golden fleece. And he was trying to win his throne in ancient Greece. And they thought it was from a golden-coated ram.
Okay.
Right? So they sent him, the myth goes, to the land of the Colchis, which is modern-day Georgia country, not the state in the United States, country by the Black Sea in Asia. Okay. So Greece, that's pretty far, going pretty far back then, out into Asia. Now, there is no evidence, obviously, to say the Takin had a direct effect on this myth, but they believe that the golden fleece, or a fleece from a golden Takin, would have been worth phenomenal amounts of goods and notoriety back in the day. So they think, because the Takin was so elusive and mythical, that a golden coated Takin somehow made it that far west in Asia, and that there actually might be some truth to this myth, that there was this golden fleece that Jason needed to go and get. Well, so the Takin. Yeah,
I love it. And truth be told, whenever I gave tours behind the scenes about the Takin, I would always just mention, this is where the myth of the Golden Fleece came from.
Yeah.
But I never did the research, and I never knew the background. I just used it as a talking point. But once again, not being really into myths or whatnot, that's what I have you four. Cool.
Well,
Now if I gave a Takin tour, I could actually sound even more educated.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our myths are based in fact.
Sure.
Especially in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, some of the stuff that they based it on was based on facts that maybe passed down through generations. But that golden fleece was probably, they think, from a golden Takin.
Very cool.
There you go.
Oh, well,
there you go,
Angie. So good with that. And thank you, everybody, for listening and sticking with us and letting me talk about Takin for an hour or so. I appreciate your interest. Check these guys out at your local accredited zoo, and you'll thank me if you haven't already spent some time in front of their exhibit. And if you're awesome, you can travel to Bhutan and see them in the wild. Send me pictures. I'll be super jealous. And just thanks to everybody, especially Peppermint Narwhal, for collaborating with us on this species. Check them out at peppermintnarwhal.com or also on Facebook. And once again, a huge shout out to Kubla, Chabi, Jensi, Maylee, and Bozo, and all my keeper friends that I got to work with in training the Takin and helping me fall passionately in love with this species. And I just feel blessed to have those critters in my life.
Yep. Well, stay tuned. We have some special episodes coming up, and we'll be back soon with another species. We've got a full plate. A full plate. Angie and I have some big things cooking.
It's getting good.
It's getting good.
We're getting better by the day.
Yeah. So take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.